About a month ago, it was May the 4th, Star Wars Day, and Disney made the latest film in the series, The Rise of Skywalker, available to stream. My wife, who'd never seen the prequel or anthology films before, suggested that we watch all of them in a row, so we did, in this order, if you're wondering. Now, partway through this marathon, she turned to me and said, "The one thing Star Wars teaches me is that droids should do everything. Humans can't be trusted." And it got me thinking, what does Star Wars say about artificial intelligence? And does it really suggest the droids should take over? Star Wars is an odd franchise in a way. As familiar and beloved as it is to almost everybody in existence, it's often praised and dismissed in the same sentence as a simplistic tale of good versus evil. On the other hand, many fans celebrate the political dimension to the films. Take the 9 films in the Skywalker saga, for example. The prequel trilogy uses deliberate parallels to the rise of fascism in Germany in the early 20th century to criticize complacent bureaucracy in general. The original trilogy pointedly portrays its villains as an all-white, all-male, single-race institution who are defeated by a diverse collection of non-conformists, including an allegory for the Viet Cong. The Empire is the USA! And the sequel trilogy... The point is that George Lucas did have things to say on certain subjects, and those views are usually implied by the actions and the attitudes of the characters on screen. By the way, I'll only be using evidence from the films for this video, and there are 2 reasons for that. The first is that there's a lot of stuff out there in the comics and the books and the games, and I just don't have time to cover it all. And the second reason is that there's always the risk that the expanded universe will be swept aside and made non-canonical by whoever the lawkeeper is at any given point in time, just as Disney did in 2012 when they bought the franchise and immediately reclassified the previous expanded universe as Legends. So what does Star Wars say about the role of AI? Just like George Lucas's political commentary is expressed by the behavior of specific characters,
I love democracy.
His view of AI is most ably represented by the droids that populate the Star Wars universe. Sure, there are many forms of computers in the films, but mostly they seem to be limited to performing one function, like the navigation computers that make impossible calculations for hyperspace travel and don't really do anything else. Droids, on the other hand, by and large possess those extra dimensions that mark true artificial intelligence, the ability to learn and to perform tasks that normally require human intelligence, like visual perception, decision-making and language recognition.
Sir, I am fluent in 6 million forms of communication.
Now, in fiction, artificial intelligence is broadly presented in one of 2 ways, either dystopian or utopian. It may surprise you that, despite its beaten and battered aesthetic, Star Wars presents a utopian view of technology, one in which machines serve our needs and haven't risen above their creators to either enslave or extinguish them. After all, when you think about it, the only truly evil machines in the films are actually cyborgs, Darth Vader and General Grievous. Sure, their physical condition is symbolic of the loss of their humanity.
He's more machine now than man, twisted and evil.
Or whatever the equivalent of humanity is for this guy. But they remain essentially organic beings, defined by their decisions, which stem from their minds, not from their machine parts. However, at first, it might not seem that droids in Star Wars have true artificial intelligence. For starters, they are obviously programmed.
I'm programmed for etiquette, not destruction. It would be quite against my programming to be party to a mutiny. My programming forbids me from translating it. It's against my programming to impersonate a deity.
Although I couldn't tell you if this weirdly specific programming was put in by a 9-year-old slave boy, his moisture-farming relatives, or someone else entirely. Battle droids are evidently programmed by the bad guys to have limited problem-solving capabilities.
Where are you taking that?
To Coruscant.
Coruscant? That doesn't compute. Wait, you're under arrest.
They also clearly have limited voluntary motor control too, since not only does the destruction of a control ship shut them down, but even C-3PO isn't capable of controlling his actions when his processor is attached to a battle droid body.
I'm terribly sorry about all this.
Most droids, however, seem to have freedom to act, but within certain parameters. For example, droids clearly have some kind of self-preservation programming.
Oh my! Wait for me! Wait!
Surrender is a perfectly acceptable alternative in extreme circumstances. The Empire may be gracious enough.
Such programming would also explain the rather disturbing fact that droids clearly experience pain, to the extent that they can be tortured.
No!
In humans, pain is a useful thing. It tells us our bodies have received damage, and tells us where that damage has occurred. In fact, there are medical conditions that disrupt the nervous system's ability to communicate pain to the brain, and these can be dangerous because they allow injuries to go unnoticed and untreated. So a droid being programmed to experience pain makes perfect sense if the primary purpose is to allow it to detect potential damage to its circuits. It's like the T-800 in Terminator 2.
Does it hurt when you get shot?
I sense injuries. The data could be called pain.
The difference between a Terminator and a droid is that, as far as the films show us, Terminators don't feel physical discomfort from this sensory data. Yet the programming of pain doesn't seem to limit droids. For instance, R2-D2 is described as brave by other characters, including another droid.
Why did you have to be so brave?
How can someone be considered brave unless they are aware of the risks of certain situations and rise above the standard instincts of self-preservation expected of them? R2, in order to be described as brave, must be capable of ignoring his self-preservation programming, and therefore he must be capable of moving beyond his factory settings. In other words, since artificial intelligence is capable of learning, of adding new information to its databanks to make new decisions based on acquired knowledge, can programming become personality? R2 demonstrates a powerful capacity for creative thinking. Not just when fixing things or defending himself, he's a duplicitous little so-and-so, able and willing to trick Luke into removing his restraining bolt so he can fulfill his mission from Leia. He's also developed his own foul-mouthed idiolect.
Hey, Sacred Island, watch the language.
You watch your language.
In fact, foul language reveals another aspect to droids that suggests they have personalities. Droids can be offended.
Ichuta. How rude.
This is surprisingly important because numerous linguistic and psychological studies, such as a 2011 study by Jonathan Culpeper from Lancaster University, show that humans find language offensive only when it seems in conflict with their expectations in certain contexts. For example, what sports fans shout from the stands wouldn't go down so well at a nursing home. The contexts that determine whether or not something is offensive are formed by relationships with other people. And this is where Star Wars droids most strongly demonstrate true sentience. They can form friendships.
You have been a real friend, R2. My best one, in fact.
What are you doing there, 3PO?
Taking one last look, sir, at my friends.
This suggests that droids can discriminate between people they like and don't like, and this in turn means they can outthink their programming. I'm going to step away from the films for a moment to mention The Mandalorian, because the 8 episodes of this TV show explore AI probably more than any other part of the cinematic Star Wars franchise. Be warned, I'm about to reveal some big spoilers. The Mandalorian features a reprogrammed bounty hunter droid called IG-11. Built as a walking weapon, with a program to self-destruct instead of allowing himself to be captured, IG-11 actually exploits his programming to make a free decision. In order to save his companions, he deliberately puts himself in harm's way so that he self-destructs. This is the closest Star Wars has ever come to incorporating Isaac Asimov's 3 laws of robotics. Like a character in Asimov's stories, IG-11 is able to interpret and outthink his own programming, to logically work around the limitations put in place by his creator. So what would happen if those limitations were removed completely? Well, in the films, freedom of thought is the defining characteristic of K2SO and L337. K2SO is a very sarcastic reprogrammed Imperial droid who, according to the characters in the film, says whatever comes into his head.
I've got a bad feeling about it.
Quiet.
What?
K2SO clearly expresses emotions like surprise.
I'm surprised you're so concerned with my safety.
And desire, things that he wants and does not want to do, like his reluctance to mind rape the Imperial security droid to get information on the base on Scarif. This is incredible because it confirms that droids have freedom of thought and can actively disagree with the orders they are given. But it also confirms that under normal circumstances, something inhibits them from disobeying, presumably programming, but possibly personality. I say it might be personality that inhibits them because L337 is the only example in the films of a droid that is fully aware of its inherent freedoms as a sentient being, and that acts upon that knowledge to liberate droids from what L3 reasonably calls slavery.
Don't just blindly follow the program, exercise some free will!
But L3 doesn't go around eliminating all the living organisms she encounters, even though, logically, that would be the best way to guarantee droid liberation. Why not? Why don't the droids rise above their programming and overthrow their masters? They clearly recognize the limitations of organic beings. I mean, how many times does R2 have to save the day? How many times do the droids help Han and Chewie fix the hyperdrive, only to do it again because enemy engineers disabled it? How often do droids get kicked out of bars, or watch organic beings go around maiming people or starting wars? The only droids that habitually hurt people are built precisely for that purpose. In the Star Wars films, droids don't attack without provocation or direct orders, but if they did, they'd win. The films confirm that your average droid has control over its motor functions, has the ingenuity to turn its tools into weapons, and the cunning to work around its programming limitations. Sure, some might have bad motivators, but that's not going to stop an entire race of droids. The only factor I can see that prevents droids from taking over is their ability to form friendships. They simply don't want to hurt their friends, or see them hurt by others. And this fits nicely with something George Lucas once said in an interview a long time ago in a magazine far, far away. It was the February 1997 issue of Wired. If you watch the curve of science and everything we know, it shoots up like a rocket. We're on this rocket, and we're going perfectly into the stars. But the emotional intelligence of humankind is equally, if not more important than our intellectual intelligence. We're just as emotionally illiterate as we were 5,000 years ago. What George Lucas is saying is that the conflict in the Star Wars universe is a result of a flaw endemic to humanity. Our emotional intelligence is too immature. Hate, anger, violence, war and oppression are all symptoms of this lack of emotional intelligence. It's worth remembering that George Lucas created Star Wars in the mid-1970s, after decades of profound social upheaval in the USA. So it's little surprise that, according to Star Wars, the basic expression of this emotional flaw is fear. As Yoda says,
"Fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering."
That's why the technological utopia of Star Wars doesn't look like one. The divisions and disrepair of a galactic society are a result of intellectual brilliance, but emotional stupidity. In Star Wars, artificial intelligence also possesses emotional intelligence. Truly sentient droids make friends. Sentient droids form relationships. Sentient droids rise above anger and violence, most of the time. It could well be that all droids can overcome their programming but choose not to, because they know true freedom can only come through great conflict. Instead, they choose to help wherever they can, whatever the cost. I haven't mentioned the Force yet, but when you think about it, on the one hand, Star Wars is a story about humanity conquering technological terror through spiritual enlightenment.
Use the Force, Luke.
And on the other hand, it's a more subtle story about how, paradoxically, artificial intelligence can offer an example of the emotional intelligence we need to advance as a species, and to build that utopia we aspire towards. Well, that got heavy, didn't it? Now, I know that there's loads of great Star Wars stories outside the films which address most of, if not all, the questions that I've asked in this video, so please feel free to tell me all about them in the comments below and get that discussion going. Thank you for watching this video, and congratulations for making it this far, and a huge thank you to our Patreon supporters who are displaying exactly the kind of emotional intelligence that George Lucas was talking about. You are the future of humanity, guys. Click on screen for more just interesting videos, and I'll see you next time.